Good morning to all of you all. Good morning to Sherry and whoever else has joined us online. This morning, Karen Wills is with us because she is a longtime representative of that which means MUUSJA. All of the mission statements we can come up with can be reflected in Karen's work. She's quite a brilliant individual. I feel very, very honored to be with her. We got to paint the town last night, so that was good fun. This is Karen's third or fourth visit to UUCD. One of those visits was spent in the basement because of a storm or something, and she oftentimes lives in her car. That is her personal hotel. So we are very happy to say that she did not use her vehicle last night. She was hosted by a particular family. So Karen has been a former executive director for MUUSJA. She is now currently the democracy strategist and technology specialist. She is a lifelong UU. And one of the things I learned last night in our walk on the lake walk is that she is a Wellesley girl. And so that was kind of fun. I told her that it's possible that we have some Wellesley graduates here in this audience, or maybe some of your children have attended, but she is in very good company with us, that's for sure. We're also going to have a chance to write some postcards today. I would like to officially introduce you to Karen Wills. Thank you, Karen, for being with us.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And it is such a delight to be up here and to be hanging out with Kathy, who of course is on the MUUSJA board of directors, and to have been hosted so incredibly hospitably, including, you know, at what I won't reveal the address, but it's the best bed and breakfast in Duluth, in case you want to know. So thank you. Yeah. And I will. I am a Wellesley grad, and I was a scholarship kid. So just you know, to bust any stereotypes there. The MUUSJA is part of a national coalition called You the Vote, which is happening across the country. And we are the Minnesota Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Alliance, which in 2024 and 2022 and 2020 has been representing You the Vote for Minnesota in this space. You know, sort of translating and implementing the plans of You the Vote in the context of Minnesota elections and politics. But MUUSJA is never about one election, and we're not primarily about the election. We're primarily about social justice. And so we have historically been involved with, you know, as Tina would know, with Planned Parenthood, doing clinic escorts. We've been involved with affordable housing. We've been involved with many, many different kinds of movements and contexts. So what I'd like to do is take a few minutes just to review some of that, talk a little bit about kind of what MUUSJA is and what it's about and what it does. And then focus just a bit, and I want to put that into a context of what Unitarians have done for hundreds of years and what we do as Unitarian Universalists. Historically, that may be old news to some of you, and it might be new news. Some of what I learned researching some of this a couple of years ago was new news to me, even though I was born and raised in UU Sunday School. And then hopefully we can sort of, you know, bang through some of that fairly quickly, and then actually take some time to move towards a hands-on project which is our 2024 showcase project for MUUSJA called Postcards to Young Rangers. And so I'm going to try to tell you about those three things. What's MUUSJA? Where are UU's positioned historically in terms of social justice work? And what are we doing right now, right here? And what can we do right now today, both this morning and for y'all who are like really into this, we're actually going to come back during coffee hour and have a postcard party. So that's the plan. All right, just to begin with a bite of history. John Adams and Abigail were abolitionists. They were among the few founding fathers who were rapidly anti-slavery very, very early on. And I think the history of our country would look quite different if they had been in the majority, which they were not. But this was John and Abigail, some early Unitarians, preaching that slavery is an evil of colossal magnitude. They were among the first Black Lives Matter Unitarians. Ralph Waldo Emerson, 1842, we are not permitted to stand as spectators in the pageant which the times exhibit. We are parties also, and we have a responsibility which is not to be declined. Right? So Ralph wrote a lot. He was a philosopher, but he was also someone who put out a call to action. When I was a child, I was born in 1956, and so in 1965, when Reverend James Reeb and Ms. Viola Liuso and Jim Johnson, several other folks were murdered in Alabama during the Civil Rights Freedom Summer. James Reeb was a Unitarian minister who is one of our martyrs. And when Dr. Martin Luther King preached the eulogy for James Reeb at his funeral, Dr. King said he was murdered by the irresponsibility of every politician who has moved down the path of demagoguery, who has fed his constituents the stale bread of hatred and the spoiled meat of racism. Dr. King was very clear that the responsibility for the murder of James Reeb was not only individual, but institutional. That's what Unitarians do. And Dr. King, of course, was not a Unitarian, but the minister of my church when I was a little girl marched with him in Selma and has marched again. Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, Zoom folks, sorry about that. And has marched repeatedly through the years. When I was a child in Southern California, Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers movement was teaming with Filipino leaders in California on the grape strikes and the lettuce strikes. I didn't eat any grapes or lettuce until I was something like 15, because all of the Unitarians that I grew up with were supporting the Reverend Howard Matson, who was the chaplain for the United Farm Workers and for Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta and that whole team that were fighting for dignity and unionization and just basically food and housing and education for those workers. Just as we are continuing to fight today, I'll be spending all of 2025 working with the North Star Alliance to uncouple local police from the immigration enforcement by ICE, so that somebody doesn't run a stoplight and be deported after they've lived here for 20 years without documentation. And slide aside, all of these things go on today. They're not done. But Unitarian Universalists have been involved with social justice movements since the dawn of our denomination. We are a disruptive force. We are a powerful force. We're little, but we're pretty darn good at collaborating. And on those occasions when we forget our exceptionalism and we, embrace humility and collaboration, we do really, really good work. Howard Madsen and Rosemary Madsen were heroes of my parents when I was a kid. And they were among the early UUs who were arrested in that movement, and were given finally unconditional release after many hours in jail. And then the next day, the union organizers came in and were allowed on the ranch. So sometimes when our clergy has stepped up, this kind of moral imperative and the commitment of putting your own body on the line in collaboration with frontline organizers has been a powerful force. Rosemary Madsen was one of the very early feminist UUs who was really stepping up and saying, we don't just want a piece of the pie, it's still a patriarchal pie. We want to change the recipe, right? So that by the time I graduated college in 1976, we were called Wellesley women rather than Wellesley girls, right? And that's partly thanks to Rosemary. Steve Shirk was an activist. It still is actually an activist with Desert Witness, with the Peace Network, protesting the nuclear test, protesting the U.S. government's refusal to enter into the U.S. nuclear test ban treaty. There was a huge peace march. A lot of people don't know this UU history, but UUs participated in huge numbers in the peace march for global nuclear disarmament in 1986. 3,700 miles they marched for 9 months from the West Coast all the way to DC. So right around the time that, Dr. Strangelove was coming out. And if you saw the movie Oppenheimer, I saw Oppenheimer and Dr. Strangelove in the same week. Terrifying. Black Lives Matter, the movement here in Minneapolis was led by UU minister Lena Gardner, who also has founded Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism and is a force for housing now and for a coalition of UUs across the country. And of course, here, I don't have a photo for this, but here in the Northland, we had 3,000 people come a couple summers ago, protesting the Line 3 pipeline. We tried to block the Line 3 pipeline. Of those 3,000 people, 300 were Unitarians from all over the country, and MUUSJA coordinated the housing and food for all of those Unitarians. And then we had the Treaty People March from Itasca, where people walked all the way down 250 miles from Itasca to St. Paul. It was Unitarian Universalist congregations who fed and housed those walkers every step of that march. And, and then drove around and camped in our cars and made coffee at 6 a.m. before the marchers got on the road. So anyway, so that is a bite of history. And I think what it does is to sort of remind us that we are not just about postcards. We are not just about one election. There's never just one election. We're about justice and about accountability, and whoever gets elected in whatever the election happens to be, because there's always another election, right? Whoever that is, we are showing up, and we're showing up with power that is not power over other people, but power with other people. And we always have had partners, and we always have had causes, and it's always the same thing. It's about freedom and dignity and vulnerability and humility. And we keep on showing. So no matter what happens, there's no win and there's no lose. There's just showing up, right? MUUSJA, the Minnesota UU Social Justice Alliance, is the coalition of 28 UU congregations across Minnesota, and we hold hands also with North and South Dakota when we can. We've done that with, Standing Rock, we've done that with pipelines, some of these are regional projects. The election, we tend to focus just on Minnesota, just because that's what makes more sense. North and South Dakota are doing their thing, by the way, admirably. We also team with the UUA National Side with Love and UU Service Committee, UU Social Justice Committee, all of these bodies that are part of the national scene. And we sort of distill what they're doing and implement that into Minnesota, right? For the Minnesota work, we are also colleagues with a number of multi-faith allies. So we team together with groups like Isaiah, the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition, with March, which is an anti-racism coalition in mostly the metro area. But most of our teamwork tends to be statewide, because MUUSJA, of course, is a statewide coalition. So we don't just focus, just on Duluth or just on the Twin Cities. The work that we do, we very consciously try to select projects that are going to encompass the whole state. Our community allies that are not necessarily faith-based groups include League of Women Voters, Minnesota Voice, which, thank you, Minnesota Voice, has helped to fund this project. It's this year we're engaged in a $50,000 project, of which we have a grant from Minnesota Voice for $12,000. That was extremely helpful. And then We Choose Us Minnesota is a coalition of about 40 progressive faith and secular organizations, including the League and the unions and Jewish and Muslim and Buddhist and multi-faith Christian and Catholic organizations are all part of We Choose Us Minnesota. And the MUUSJA was one of the founding partners of that group as well. So, and that is a group that is explicitly committed to promoting a diverse, inclusive, multicultural democracy across our state. We will be carrying on, again, just for more than one election. Okay. So MUUSJA works on issues of autonomy. Some of you might be aware that Katie Klein, who's the current executive director of MUUSJA, and of course was DRE here for a lot of years, had worked a lot with we did a thing with the Queer Caucus back about a year ago, and then taught the Transforming Hearts curriculum, trying to sort of really educate ourselves about how to be good allies for transgender individuals and their families. Sacred, the Spiritual Alliance of Communities for Reproductive Dignity, is a multi-faith pro-choice group that, again, is kind of leading these. So looking at autonomy, we also are very involved with Compassion and Choice, which does the end of life bill. So MUUSJA has helped to coordinate legislative work on all of those issues of body autonomy. Basic needs, food, shelter, work, and safety, we show up for. And as I mentioned, my big thing next year is going to be immigration justice. Speaking of safety, community solidarity, we have shown up always at Pride, and with particularly a lot of the vandalism of mosques. You might not know that Minnesota holds the title. We are #1 for voter turnout, yes, and we are #1 for mosque vandalism across the country. We have had 8 mosques violently and destructively vandalized in the past year. So this is an ongoing, serious issue, and it's being fed by, sort of right-wing MAGA folks, unfortunately, have been really quite insistently anti-Muslim and insulting the Somali communities, particularly across Minnesota, which are many of our Muslims, and that's been a big deal. So we're part of a committee that was started by Jewish Community Action called Communities Combating Hate. And that group has helped with a hate law bill in the legislature and also with just showing up physically around some of these issues. Obviously, we do democracy defense, which I'll tell you about in just a minute, a little bit more. We've been doing that for a lot of years. And then we focus on the ecosystem, right? We show up and we join the environmental justice teams of all of our congregations in major statewide climate and environmental action, as well as the human rights issues. So, okay. So that's kind of a, MUUSJA is a very, very big deal. It's got a very wide umbrella. It has a tiny staff. And so it's really about linking the congregations and how the staff function is as resource people, trusted guides, and connectors. We're like the little round part in your Tinker Toy structures, right? And the congregations and all of the volunteers who are part of that are really the structure. We're just kind of this little hub in the middle of it. When we think about how we show up for voting, oftentimes people are like, well, how can you do that in church? We're supposed to be, we can't take sides, we're nonpartisan. We have people from, all orientations and parties. And that is true, right? So we have Unitarian Universalists who are Republican, Green Party, Socialist Workers Party, I hate all politicians, and, DFL, all the things, right? All of those. Voting and how we think about elections, from a MUUSJA perspective, voting is how we hire people to make fair rules for what's required, what's permitted, or what's prohibited, as our Secretary of State Steve Simon says, in order to share what everybody needs and get along so everybody is safe. That is how we think about what elections are about. When you frame your political work and your political education in those terms, very much the way League of Women Voters does it, right? It is not, there is no win or lose, right? It's like we really, truly want everyone to vote because when we have, good government, everybody benefits. We expanded our democracy, as you all know, last year. And I'm not going to go through, I'll just pay through the automatic voter registration, pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, restore the vote. So we have 55,000 voters who are on parole or probation who can vote now, wouldn't have been able to vote in previous years. Permanent absentee voting list, and a number of other things that I'll flip through quickly here. What is at stake in November? We're about ready to take that break. Okay, so we're going to take a break in just a minute and kind of pass the basket. But let me. This is a good slide to leave up while we do that. What's at stake in November of 2024 is that in the state of Minnesota, the progressive majority that passed those pro-democracy laws is hanging by a razor-thin margin. 5 votes, actually, altogether. And in some districts where those votes came from, fewer than 200 voters determined whether the person who goes to the state legislature to vote for pro-democracy policies is someone who is climate conscious, pro-choice, gender affirming, and pro-democracy, or someone who is often opposed to those kinds of values. And so what we're doing is MUUSJA has created and is mailing, and I'm going to step aside and come back. We designed and printed, and on the 17th of September, we'll be mailing 70,000 of these little postcards to young, diverse renters in key districts across the state of Minnesota for the purpose of preserving the progressive majority that has created Minnesota as an island in the Midwest for reproductive choice and gender affirming healthcare, as well as democracy, climate, and a few other things. So we have instructions and suggestions of a note to add to the postcard. We have postcards with a little tiny box that lets you put maybe 6 or 7 words on there to complete the sentence. I will vote because I care who makes laws about whatever your thing is. And we have address labels, and the address labels are going to 70,000 apartments in key districts across the state, and they will reach probably about 135,000 voters, potential voters.
Only just come in, but I'm very impressed so far.
Thank you. All right. And now that project is going to cost $50,000, which is actually cheap in the grand scheme of election work, because that it translates into, I think it's about 60 cents per voter. And typically a campaign will spend about $3 per voter to, sort of encourage folks to get out and vote. So it's a relatively cheap campaign, but it's expensive for us. And we are still, passing the basket. And the basket that we're passing today, right now, is essentially focused on recouping some of the costs of the postage that we're sharing with the congregations. We have 26 of our 28 congregations actively involved in holding postcard parties, and starting well, we've started already, but actually officially starting on the 18th of September, the day after we do the mailing, we will be texting and phoning the 50,000 people for whom we have a valid phone number. So we'll be running phone banks, and I'll be doing these trainings, at whenever we can make an appointment to do that. So that'll be coming up. Should we have do you want to have a pause for some sort of Q&A kind of things? Yeah.
Checks.
MUUSJA, MUUSJA. Thank you. Yeah, that would be lovely.
Wonderful. Thank you. And so for those of you who are out in the Zoom audience, of course, you can go to Symbol Give and do things that way too. And we'll be doing things during the service as well. Just for those of you who just came in or more recently, some folks end up coming just to the forum and don't attend the service. And so we wanted to give everyone an opportunity to give via our own forum's woven basket, because MUUSJA is our woven basket recipient of the month. Yeah, Karen, are you taking questions now, or do you want to? I actually
one very important one before we start questions, and then I would love
great.
to. Okay, so one extremely important point before we invite questions, comments, whatever. What we do not do as congregations is to endorse, embrace, discuss, criticize any specific candidate, party, or political action committee. So all of the work that we do as a congregation is under the, and as MUUSJA, is under the umbrella of 501c3. MUUSJA is a 501c3 nonprofit, which also, by the way, means that any direct contributions to MUUSJA are tax deductible, if you do that, as charitable contributions. We don't, we can very explicitly, and we do and will and continue to focus on issues, positions, policies, individual bills that are absolutely aligned with the UUA actions of immediate witness. And so, for example, when I say we are a pro-choice denomination, that is a fact. It doesn't mean that every single Unitarian, maybe not even all of you in this room, are necessarily going to be pro-choice in your own beliefs. You don't have to be. We don't have to think alike to love alike, right? But the action of immediate witness and the majority of the UUA clearly has taken a pro-choice stand as a matter of respecting our individual worth and dignity to make our own healthcare decisions. So for example, so that's just important. So also I'll invite you to kind of observe that if there's questions, comments, that we are, solidly in issue-focused and nonpartisan, non-candidate related spaces. That includes the fact that, if you have city council or school board members who are technically in a nonpartisan race, or in a race where they don't declare a particular party affiliation, we still don't get to embrace and endorse them officially in church and with church communications because they are candidates. So so the rule is, if you can see a face on it, or if you see a donkey or an elephant, you don't do that at church. Okay. I mentioned we're part of the vote, and we're looking at congregations. Well, we had set goals early on. We were hoping for 15 congregations. We have 27, so that's kind of nice. These are the postcards that we'll show you. I'm gonna just flip through some of this quickly, and yeah, and that's this is the MUUSJA logo. When you see this hummingbird, that's MUUSJA. We have website, MUUSJA.org, which is a good place. We have a tiny staff, so the website admittedly is not updated and revised as often as it should be. But, if you're interested in what's going on, we don't spam folks and we don't sell your information, but we do have a newsletter that goes out, more or less once a month or 6 weeks or whenever we get around to, having news to share. And that's on the MUUSJA.org. Sign up and get that as an email if you're into that. So, all right. So I think that is, and we're leaving that on for the for Zoom folks. Hello, Zoom folks. Thank you for being there.
Thank you so much, Karen. And we do have some questions, it looks like, in the room. I'm going to go ahead and Kathy, would you be willing to bring the microphone for a question? I'm going to check on our online friends here. My phone is not cooperating in that regard. So
first of all, I want to thank you for what you're doing. It's extraordinary work. And you've given new meaning to the word traveler. 2 questions. One, do you have a social media initiative that is a companion to this initiative, to the postcard initiative? And secondly, have you done any alpha test or pilot test to give you some information about what kind of results you expect from this?
Yeah, thank you so much, and fantastic questions. We at the moment do not have dedicated communication staff. So our social media presence, we're for better or worse, we still do have that toe on X, and we're pretty active on Facebook. So the Facebook page is often announcing and sharing, and then we kind of cross-fertilize with posting to congregational Facebook groups and pages and to the national UU the Vote. So probably, our Facebook presence is pretty solid. The rest of our social media, extending ourselves into TikTok and WhatsApp and some of the, kind of actually current social media instead of, old lady social media, is not as strong as it should be. Sorry, I'm just owning that personally. I'm on Facebook. So yeah, so if anybody wants to volunteer to help MUUSJA with additional social media work, yay, let's do that then. I had a wonderful conversation with a friend of mine, Laura Asplin, who's the political director for the AFL-CIO, when we were starting to plan this project. I was designing the postcards and getting some feedback from some graphics people and stuff. And Sam Stroikens over at the League, who's the political director for League of Women Voters for Minnesota. And they were wonderful helpers and advisors around what we could break out. We chatted with a group. There's an organization called the Analyst Institute, which will run those ABE things. We didn't have the money or the numbers to be able to actually invest in outcome research for this project. But what I do have is, you know, I mean, like for Rochester, for example, and the MUUSJA, I have a list of, you know, every single apartment building. And what I can do is to look at, you know, in a very rough way, look and compare voter turnout from those buildings for, say, 2022 versus 2024. And obviously that's a very crude measure because there's so many, you know, differences in the election. But we also have the option, there are one or two buildings that we didn't reach, which tend to be, because it's expensive, $10 per building. And so there are a couple of buildings that have fewer than 20 units. And the other thing that I can do is to pull those buildings and compare the apartment rental turnout in those slightly smaller buildings with the turnout in buildings that have 30 or 40 units where we sent those cards. And just, you know, so short answer, yes, I will be playing with that. We don't have, you know, it won't really be like a clinical trial, but it'll just be fun to check and hopefully we'll have a little bit of a boost in that turnout. What we do know is that the concept, one of the reasons why many of your campaigns, I think, are beginning to adopt postcards is that we know from other research done in other places, you know, with bigger budgets and more formal, you know, structured studies, that the process of doing a postcard followed by a phone call or text message has statistically significantly boosted turnout of young renters and tends to be one of the most powerful voter outreach tools because it's less ephemeral. It's not fleeting like most kinds of, you know, phone calls and text messages and things. It actually sticks around. Personal story, I was a campaign manager in 2018 for a campaign based out of Maple Grove, and I sent postcards for that candidate back in, we were just kind of experimenting with the concept. And I got phone calls in 2020 and 2022 saying, you know, I like that girl. Is she running again? I still have your postcard with your phone number. Because I put my phone number. I still have the postcard with your phone number on my refrigerator, and I just need to know where can I get one sign.
So cool.
Yeah.
We definitely have time for a few more questions here, and it looks like we're not getting any from the Zoom, so let's go back to the room.
I appreciate what you just said because I guard my cell phone number because my daughters, they say they're just totally overwhelmed with texts. And even though that's supposedly, you know, in their generation, around 40, you know, the primary communication, and one of them doesn't hardly do email apart from work anymore. It's still, yeah, that was and I just wondered if that's because I'm old, because that postcard is there. And then 2020, I think I wrote lots of letters, and I realized we're doing the posters, they may never open those, but a postcard like you made, that's so colorful, it seems intuitively to be good. So I'm glad that there's research backing that up.
Invite you back over
See any more questions? I would like to say two things really quickly. One of them is we have a sheet here, and I can make more if you need them. This is the very short version of what Karen is up to with all the other Minnesota partners. And this is a longer version. This is across the state, so you might say, well, I don't need to know that. But I suggest that you pick this up because we have a ton of folks in Minnesota who are doing a lot to defend democracy. And I think it would be great if we joined in that partnership. The other thing is, speaking of partnerships, we are looking for, MUUSJA is looking for a person called the connector. That would be someone who connects with the state offices, either Karen's or in a small staff. We have the executive director and the board, and with the congregation. several people across the state have become connectors for their congregation. And we would certainly love to have someone take on that role as a UUCD MUUSJA connector. It would be particularly advantageous at this time in our lives. And in the future as well.
So Kathy, how can people get a hold of MUUSJA, and who should they contact if they're interested in being one of the congregational connectors?
I think probably just contact me
Amazing.
and I will get your name to the right person. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and let's thank Karen one more time for this great. A wonderful start to our fourth season, and just as a plug, next week we will have someone from WLSSD here to talk about recycling. We all have a lot of questions about that and some confusion over what can go in the bin, what shouldn't. So be sure to come back next week for that. And it sounds like we'll have a postcard writing opportunity after the service. So awesome.